All right. Welcome, everybody. Excited to have you here and getting into structure yields consistency. And we bring insights here with a couple senior folks in the SDR world. Sean Dwyer from ZoomInfo. Can you give a couple words about yourself here?
Yeah, thank you, Pete. I'm a senior manager on the sales development team at ZoomInfo. My primary role is to lead the outbound sales development function targeting our new business accounts. So we work in tandem with the account executive team for new business revenue goals. But just happy to be here, Pete.
Awesome. Excited to have you, Sean. And of course, we have Jeff Haber here as well from our homegrown Tenbound. Jeff, how are we doing?
Doing good today. Thanks, Pete. Hi, Sean. Happy to be here. Jeff Haber, VP of Growth and Research at Tenbound. I'm really excited to just participate in this event, and I'll encourage everyone joining in to ask a lot of questions.
Awesome. Well, we have some questions teed up. Of course, we're talking about data, comp plans, and kind of how that all flows with one another. So to get things kicked off here, we got an interesting question to Sean to open things up. How does data provide consistency and structure within an SDR org? What are we looking at here?
Yeah, so in our world at ZoomInfo, right, data is everything to us. It's at the core of our offering, but more importantly, it's at the core of our own go-to-market motion. So ultimately, right, it makes or plays a major role in basically every decision we make moving forward as an org, but more importantly as an SDR group, right? So who we target, when we pivot, why we go after all of these things. And when it comes to consistency with that, right, the term in my mind went to like repeatable process, right? That's the thing I think about the most, and it's crucial in the day-to-day life of any SDR, right? Removing unknowns or variables, things that throw a wrench into your plans, if you will. But understanding questions like who we're targeting, why we target them, right? And then not to get too SDR-ish, right? But ICP, right? Or not the total addressable market. Don't stray from that. Consistently chase that because there's data behind it, right? As to why you went after it in the first place, right? And then you go beyond that and it's qualification points and data points, right? The data we provide, right? Titles and responsibilities and growth and org size and location, all these things. But I think like when you think about it from a consistency standpoint, right, there's need to have pieces of information, right? And if you're asking the right questions and the same questions, right, you create the consistency within the org for people to be successful, right? Move up, do the things that they want to do long-term. And then beyond that, right, the consistency beyond need to have pieces of information, right? And what's going to make a great meeting, right, at the end of the day, right? Because that's ultimately our job is uncovering, right? I know Jeff feels really strongly about this, but there's two pieces. It's like pain points and uncovering, right, what we're going to fix, right? And then the use case, how they're going to leverage it and who's going to leverage it internally, right? So, when there's alignment on these things, like I said, it takes the guessing out, it takes out the unknown pieces of the equation. So for me personally, it aligns my SDRs with the account executive team that we support, right? Go-to-market efforts, new business, that's our deal, right? So in converting not just people within our total addressable market, the ICP, right? We really zero in on this universe of companies that are our best fits, right? They're going to be leveraging ZoomInfo to its max potential, right? That's ultimately what we want our customers to do. And doing all these consistently is going to allow us to do that. And then our customers are going to see max ROI, right? And that's hopefully what happens. They renew, they buy more, they do all these things with us. But, once you've identified those, right, the quote unquote ICP and your ideal customer profile is like, there's a big question mark, right? Who's the persona, right? And you got to understand who's the person I need to engage with and how am I going to get in touch with them? For us, right, my example that I can share, right, sales leaders, marketing leaders, the recruiting persona, right? I'm somebody on my team's not going to call into, say, an IT department and think that that's really going to move the needle. So understanding that piece of it for us, Pete, is like a really big thing for us to be consistently successful. And how that segues into structure, right? For me specifically, is the structure so that between SDRs and AEs, expectations are aligned and responsibilities are understood. I think that's most important to me. Is the system working to support the model that we created to go after, the ICP, all the data points that follow that? And then like, are the two sides, like this was my favorite question I really thought about with this was like, are the two sides of the house in agreement with like the input requirement, right? Like the marketing qualified lead and all the things that I just talked about in order to reach the output, right? Like, are we aligned in that sense where what we're doing equals what they need to be successful as well and for the business to be successful? So I think about it like you make upfront agreements with your customers and your prospects all the time, right? Have them internally. Be aligned, be consistent with what you're doing and what you're going after. And that's going to make for just general efficiency. It's going to lead to growth. And I just think those two things are very paramount to like a successful org, right? For sustained success. And I think for me, like as a sales development leader, like I needed to identify these things and hone in on them, right? For everybody around me to thrive. So I think really keying in on that qualification piece, right? Understanding who you're targeting and why, being consistent and not straying from it will then kind of boost the structure piece of who we support, why we support them, and if we're doing exactly what we need to be doing to do that successfully. So,
absolutely. I mean, the data integrity piece is a massive portion. It's like the backbone of any sales org, right? You know, and it's a bit of a moving target with these massive amounts of data to ensure they're consistently updated, and then ultimately reached out to. Right? So, Jeff, anything to add there?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Sean. Totally agree. Data is so vital for an SDR organization. And when you're structured in a way that allows your team to access it easily in their segments, personas, within ICPs, they can then go further and start mapping before they even make a call, potential topics to talk about to these personas, right? So they can start mapping like critical capabilities that map to pains or use cases that are very common with what your solution is. A lot of that is variable depending on what your business is and what you're offering. I also have seen how, data is fun for SDR teams because SDRs always want new shiny objects, right? Like we all know that like a great persona could come into your bucket, but after you've called them once and they haven't returned your call and you've emailed them 3 times and they haven't replied, that means they don't like you, they don't want to talk to you, and you need to move forward. And we all know that if you bring in the right data, and again, you get consistent with that message, and do a few touches on that individual person, it's going to come up the line. One of my favorite things to do whenever I've bought ZoomInfo when I was leading teams was actually build a bunch of lists for my team. So it's like I get the keys to the ZoomInfo car and I take it for a drive and I download, a couple thousand prospects across my team, segment them out to everybody, and then they're no longer having to go hunt for that information. And I view that structure as also helping provide consistency for SD's output, right? For their actions. Because as we've all seen in the remote world, we need to put tools and structure in place to support these consistent actions because we're all not line of sight anymore. You can't just peek head up over your monitor and say, "Hey, Pete, let me help you with this pitch right now." And so this has just been a whole new world, and it's been really amazing to see how teams have adapted, SDRs have adapted, and even companies by and large have adapted. So I'm a big fan of data.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, especially like Jeff, you mentioned the remote world, right? The data integrity piece, ensuring that, BDRs, SDRs are not running around trying to collect all this from different resources. There's so many data platforms out there, right? At the same time, ZoomInfo can provide one easy, integrated platform to ensure that it's up to date and that BDRs and SDRs are not, candidly wasting time searching for a phone number, searching email address, right? They know that the integrity of the data is there, and they spend their time actually outbounding and, reaching out to folks rather than, trying to track down an email or something like that. So very nice. Okay. Jeff, questions for you. Why is it so important to align SDR compensation to their influence?
Well, the number one reason is for SDRs to be happy. And one of the things that I have learned, I've gone into a lot of SDR organizations they either were nascent, there was nobody, or I was the first person. And one of the first things that I try to do is establish what the service level agreement and the qualification criteria is for the result an SDR derives and delivers. And I found that when you can nail this, right, and you can do it a variety of ways, we'll go into that maybe a little later, what you have is you take out the objectivity and subjectivity of an AE deciding whether the SDR's work was worth it or not. Because we all know, and I know, Sean, you've probably dealt with this, I've dealt with this, there's that SDR that is just kind of crying on your shoulder because they've done all this good work, but nothing transpired into something that the AE's bought off on. So what I have done in the past to remove some of that problem is put in a little bit more robust qualification criteria and actually really develop a qualification score. And that way, when SDR sets up a meeting, they have a couple people in the meeting, they can score rank everybody in the meeting based on the way they answer the questions. Because when we often go into a sales meeting, there's 2 or 3 other people with the prospect there. And other people may have other use cases that will further help multi-thread that deal into place. So I've utilized scoring in the qualification criteria to hit a certain level threshold where a meeting, if it scores at a certain level, is a sales qualified lead. And the next step is to get that lead a meeting with the field and have the field start their discovery process. When you can do that, you eliminate, again, that arbitration between the salesperson going, well, you know, they just didn't have a budget. Well, maybe you're selling the future. There's no budget for the future. You have to create that value. Because remember, sales development is value creation. That's the #1 job. So I found what this does is when you get buy-off, now granted, this takes,
might have lost Jeff here. Jeff,
yeah,
there? Give you a minute to. Oh, there you go. You lost you for a minute.
Okay. When you get that buy-in across with everyone, what happens is the SDRs become more productive because they understand now what the shape looks like. They know that it doesn't just have to be someone that has a timeline for 90 days and a budget right now. And I found that what this does is it helps create more motivation in the team because they better understand how they're going to get their results.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, I'm a huge believer. Might be the athlete in me, or the ex-athlete, I should say, in me, that, you know, if you can control your own destiny, right? There's always that thrown around, and, you know, whether it's playoff time for NFL or baseball, whatever it may be, right? And I've always been a big believer in this in business, that if you can't control your own destiny, you can't control your own income, why would you get into sales, right? And I've always had a problem with, you know, if you're relying on an AE or anyone else to flip that lead for an SDR, right? There needs to be pretty steadfast qualification criteria that you're not at the mercy of someone else's subjective opinion, right? It's objective criteria that if I can do this, you know, I get paid, and this is the bonus or a commission, right? So a lot to go in there. We're going to get into a little bit later, but Jeff, any thoughts on the SDR comp and their influence?
Yeah.
Or Sean, sorry about that. Sorry. Sean, any comp and their influence?
Yeah, no, I mean, I the very first thing Jeff said is true. It's like they need to be happy in the role. And like, I'm a very firm believer of like very firm metrics, right, will drive productivity. Like knowing what you need to do and what the output's going to be, right? You're not going to do all the work, to Jeff's point. You're going to book a meeting and then somebody's going to tell you, sorry, like I'm having a bad day. You're just not going to get paid. Like we take that out of the equation. It's something we've reviewed in a really big way is, you know, as we've grown as an organization and being able to pinpoint, right, like, all right, we have this team of just general account executives who will be a little bit more subjective, but we do have a dedicated group, right, to ensure that an outbound SDR's work not kind of spat on, right? Like, hey, I'll get back to that in 90 days when it's convenient for me, right? No, we have teams that will nurture that, right, and will multi-thread that, and we'll work through it to find, right, another point of contact with maybe a more immediate need, or string together the use case for sales when marketing taught us we've got to wait, or vice versa. So I think the clarity beyond it, like just being able to say to an SDR, like, hey, here, this is what you need to do, and this is what you're going to be able to take them as a result of it, right? And no one's going to step in, right, who you don't report to or you've never met, right? Essentially now in the virtual world to tell you, no, you're not making that much money, sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So leave it in an AE's hands. You've never even met your manager firsthand, much less the guys you're working for, guys or women that you're working for, right? That can be a tough pill to swallow. If, they're kiboshing a deal that, it's entry-level sales positions, and every last penny does count to these folks. So making sure that, they're happy and they're motivated is a huge piece.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you said something really interesting there, Sean, because having been on the other side of some of your SDR initiatives and efforts, I will say that you guys are amazing at multi-threading, right? Because now we just bought data from the other guys, you go ahead and call up the VP or you call up the senior manager, and you're everywhere. So kudos to ZoomInfo multi-threading capabilities.
Information, man, we need it.
Yeah.
Very nice. Jeff, we got a quick question here. What does the scoring look like? So I think you're getting into the multivariate qualification. You want to give us a quick rundown before we get into the last big question here? Yeah,
sure. So what it looks like is most organizations have a traditional approach to qualification. You're looking for, you're looking for some money, you're looking for some authority, you're looking for kind of need, right? Now, the problem is not all of us are selling something that already has need established for it. A lot of what we are offering is new technology. And a lot of what SDRs can do is only open the door and begin the conversation and start creating value with the prospect. And so what I've found to be really helpful is to align specifically what the SDRs are actually doing. So first of all, if the SDR gets a meeting, pay them for getting the meeting, no matter what. That's a marketing impression. It's very, very valuable. And to the point earlier in the conversation, if you've put your data structure in place, then you are consistently going after the right personas within your ideal customer profiles. So you're getting a meeting with the person, right? So give the SDR a win for that. And then when the field goes in and does their meeting and discovery, and they find out, there's some interest here. It's not really evident, but I'm going to keep working on it still. I'm going to take this, then give them another little chunk of cash for getting an opportunity started, right? And I find that when you can break down the reward, the compensation to get a meeting, the SDR is going to get those meetings and get those wins. And then if you turn the compensation to focus on the quality, in other words, pay them again if the meeting turns into a legitimate opportunity that they're working in discovery. And then of course, at the very end, pay them something if it closes. What you're going to do is you're going to start incentivizing and seeing behavior shift to people going, well, look, I pattern match and I got 3 wins calling these people doing these things in these industries. You just pattern match that in your database, and you're going to find your SDRs are going to start going after those repeatable win processes. The other thing this does, the qualification criteria being a little bit more expanded, and talking about the expansion of that, what I mean is when you talk about timing, give a score if it's 90 days out, if it's 6 months out, or if it's 9 months out. Put a score on that. Put a score on the person has access to the sponsor, is the sponsor, or maybe doesn't have access to the sponsor. Put a score on their title. If you're talking to the top of the organization that would be the economic decision maker, but he doesn't have a timeline, you still want to get that person in front of your sales team to do a message, because we all know that a decision maker can be swayed very, very quickly with a compelling value proposition. So the idea is to expand on what you're doing for your qualification criteria now by putting in some of the additional variables that are actually part of that qualification today.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah. Derek Williams with a great chat.
What I find is that when you have those facts, it works a couple different ways, because all of this can get put into your CRM system, and you can actually build a report that you can feed to product management that shows you what people are asking for in conversations. What are the use cases that are really resonating? What are the things that we're missing? You know, we need a connector to that database, or we need a connector to that application, or, you know, we need this kind of feature. These are all the kinds of things that come out when you can bring in a value creation kind of qualification discussion into the SDR's first meeting.
Absolutely. I mean, Derek Williams with a great point here in the chat with, you know, put a score on the tech stack, right?
Yeah.
Talking about integratable, you know, partners. And you may have, you know, tier 1, 2, and 3 integrations that, you know, tier 1 are your bread and butter that you can do all day long, right? And that maybe have a higher qualification. I mean, we've had that at previous companies I've worked for, so it worked out beautifully.
Yeah, I've actually had to do that because I've worked at a lot of database companies and analytics companies where connectors are the livelihood. Yep. And, you know, there's a couple types of databases that are difficult to connect to. So the engineers would be like, run away from that use case, you know, which is smart, because when you're ramping a company, you know, sell what you got and sell fast. And for SDRs, once you start seeing successful patterns in some way or shape of what your company's executing on, you want to go out and find every other prospect that has that same problem. Mm-hmm. So it kind of creates this nice closed loop information. And instead of a lot of the information being subjective, it's much more quantifiable.
Exactly. All right. And the last, probably biggest question of this whole thing, right, is, you know, obviously COVID and everything going on, you know, how do we continue to motivate our SDR, BDR teams, right? It's difficult on a daily basis. I mean, they're showing up at their home offices, coming in, doing the same thing day in and day out, probably working longer hours than they ever have, right? Because it's 30 from their bed. We just roll out of bed and start working. You know, how do we keep SDRs or BDRs motivated with simple incentive-driven behavior? So what are some ideas here for comp plans, you know, that ultimately to drive the behavior that we're looking at? What are some creative ways we've done in the past? What are you thinking, Sean?
Yeah, I think the very first thing, and it's almost a segue from, you know, what Jeff was just saying, right? It's easy, right? We have these established plans, like, you know, subjective or objective, you know, however it's graded payout, but score that meeting and pay them more for the better fit that it is, right? Like, yep. Hey, listen, if you've got a quota, but half of the meetings that you set this month were with the economic buyer, who's got, you know, the integration, maybe Salesforce that you ideally work with, and they're a company with, you know, 200 salespeople where there's an opportunity for a ton of, if you have a subscription model, licenses, right? Like, think about what that value of that opportunity is to the organization. Is it worth a $20 meeting fee, or is it worth a $200 meeting fee, right? Like, however you comp them, but, you know, let them get creative with that stuff and let them chase those big accounts, right? And reward them for it. Like, because that potential revenue to business initially, and then upon renewal, is worth way more than the SMB 10-person shop who's just getting their, you know, their business off the ground, who wants to try to cut their teeth with a database like this, right? Like, that's the easiest for me, right? Like, really reward them for the quality of the meeting, and don't just put like, hey, if it's a qualified meeting, it's worth X, like, because not all meetings are created equal.
Yeah, well, you know, one of the other tricks, if you recall, is I've always built plans where I have my SDRs make double on outbound, pay them double for an outbound meeting. And, you know, if it turns into an opportunity, that slice is double too. And if it turns into revenue, it's still a deal for everybody, sorry. But it's been really motivating, and really I've seen it impact and change behaviors. You know, which is another really cool thing that I've done, and, you know, it's a little risky depending on how your management feels about it. But when I have SDRs that are just like hit the wall with a bad day or whatever, I just tell them to go home, right? And that was when we were in the office, but I would tell them to stop work when in remote world, because up until May of last year, I was running a team and we were remote. And I felt like every time I did that, when my SDR came back to the office, they would just make a beeline for me and thank you, Jeff. I did what you said. I went and swam 100 laps. I feel so better. Thank you so much. And so it's those little things. And, I had to cover a couple times where my boss was like, hey, what happened to so-and-so? And I'm like, yeah, he had a doctor appointment. Sorry, it wasn't on the calendar, and I told her just work from home the rest of the day, but those little things, when you do that, they go a long way, because it's hard to manage, and it's hard to manage remote workers. And when you can give someone that little, hey, I care about you. I see you're struggling today. Just go get at something else and make yourself better. It really changes the game. And I was very fortunate. I had someone very early on in my career that bestowed that on me. He did have to call me after 5 days and say, if you don't come back to work.
little too long a leash there, Jeff?
Yeah, a little too, well, the waves were too good. But nonetheless, it really is a really big motivator. I know even myself as a manager and lead, when I hit that wall and my boss has said, hey, when was the last time you took care of yourself? And I think that goes even farther than, cash-based compensation. It also helps with goals, because if you just give someone the time off, they're not going to think too much about how's it going to impact my goal? I can do this. They're actually going to come back motivated and crush.
Yeah, Jeff, when somebody hears that from you, it's like, all right, first thing I think of as the recipient of that message is like, all right, Jeff cares about the person, not the employee first, right? Mm-hmm. But he also knows that the next time something comes up, there's a big project, there's a big push, there's something going on. It's like, hey, Sean, I need you. It's like, hey, he believes in me, he cares about me, and he did that solid for me once upon a time, and I'm going to dig my heels in and try to help him on this thing. So it always reciprocates too.
It does.
Absolutely. It's been interesting times. Depending where you are in the company, right? Obviously, whether you're just getting off the ground, just in your outbound session off the ground, whatever it may be. I personally have implemented a couple different strategies, right? The first one being 75% of their bonus or compensation was tied to their individual efforts. 25% was tied to the team goal, right? So it really forced them to work with one another, right? And to make sure that if, someone was absolutely crushing in their territory, right? This is when we're aligning territories, really just getting a business off the ground. And taking a look at TAM and everything, that if a certain territory was on fire, right? Kind of all hands on deck within that territory or supporting that person to make sure they're all taking home at least 25% of their bonus for the team goal, right? And it was really interesting to see the behavior of the team to rally around a certain person that was struggling, or rally around a certain person who was just crushing it, right? Mm-hmm. To make sure that that team goal was hit. It was really a beautiful thing to watch. And we ultimately did away with it, because once we segmented out even further and further, but during certain times of your business and those growth phases, right, getting and implementing some of these creative strategies can really, impact production and team morale, right? And I think right now, especially when everyone's remote, the more you can cohesively get people together and work with one another, the more success you're going to have. So,
right. And again, tie compensation to effort. Once something leaves the AR's sphere of influence, they really shouldn't have a large chunk of their compensation dependent on that. And if you incentivize them the right way and put the right tools and structure in place, they're just going to start seeing patterns. And that's where the consistency comes in, and the results will come in and come in and come in. And when the results come in, if your comp plan is aligned with that properly, they hit their goals financially. And there's nothing more I love here when an SDR tells me, I'm going to Tahoe this weekend, and I've got a $500 gambling budget, and I rented a nice Range Rover to drive up in. It's like, all right, you got the baller package. I love hearing that, right? Because that's the reward of hard effort.
I don't know what SDRs are driving Range Rovers nowadays, but kudos on them.
I have.
All right. All right. So we're wrapping up here, guys. We're coming on about the last minute or so. Any closing thoughts, Sean?
Yeah. Again, I want to thank you for having me on here today. But I think everything that's been covered here is paramount, right? Motivate the SDRs and tap into the right things. Like, let them know we care about them. But consistency, structure, comp, all these things. Like, really take a look at what you're doing and what your organization is focusing on today, and I don't know, take that look in the mirror and understand, like, could we do things a little bit better? Could we support the SDRs a little bit better? Could we align better? But I think that's the biggest thing now, is like the last piece of this conversation around motivating the SDRs, I think, is the most important thing, because they have a tough job, and it's even tougher to do in a remote world. So yeah, be an ear when they need it, be a resource when they need it, be a big motivator for them too.
All day, all day. Sean, thank you so much for joining us. Jeff, any closing thoughts here before we wrap up?
I just want to echo what Sean said. You know, it was a great conversation. I think all of us here, of course, at Tenbound, we're SDR forward 100%. And we know it's a tough slog. So I think that when you can align more of what the SDRs need to do and have that designed by people that are actually in the sales development function and compensate them accordingly, you'll hit all the results that you'll ever dream of. And it's really just the happiness factor, keeping those SDRs happy, finding out ways that you can incentivize them through compensation, through little, hey, take the afternoon off. Those all just go a far way. And to the audience, thanks a lot for attending. Please feel free to reach out to any of us via LinkedIn, email, ask further questions, and please enjoy the rest of the conference this afternoon. Thank you.
Awesome. Sean, Jeff, thank you again very much for joining this session. If any questions do come about, make sure to hit us up, LinkedIn, email. We're here for you in every single way. Thank you, buddy. Have a great rest of the day.
Cheers, everyone.